Hello, everyone. Warm welcomes to Mr. Rao's IoT expert lecture. Personally, I'm really excited about it. I think we are going to have a very interesting hour. So first of all, I will give Mr. Rao's introduction so that you're familiar with his background. And afterwards, he will deliver his expert lecture. And Mr. Rao was also generous enough with his time, to open himself to a brief Q&A session in the end. So I opened and enabled the chat for this expert lecture. And essentially, if you have any observations, interjections, questions to Mr. Rao, drop them in the chat. He'll address them in the end. I believe we can get started with that. Mr. Rao is an entrepreneur and a strategic decision maker driving results and sustainable growth for the organization. Passionate about technology, growth hacking, customer connect, and mentoring. A strong roll up your sleeves and get it done mentality is characteristic of him. Of course, Mr. Rao has 20 plus years of experience, and currently he is the Vice President of Business Development and at Device Authority, Silicon to Cloud, and XTI, XSTM. Essentially, Mr. Rao diversified his experience across various business roles in the semiconductor and technology domains, from cutting edge to frugal engineering across diverse markets and segments. For example, industry, automotives, consumer, medical, telecom, and even defense and space. Essentially, Mr. Rao is an evangelist of new technologies. He enables digital transformation, strategy formulation, consultative selling, data-driven decision-making, and growth hacking. With that, I would like to yield you the floor, sir. Very excited for your IoT expert lecture, and I'm sure that you will teach us great many details about the field in the coming hour.
Thanks, Adam. And I will share rather than teach because IoT cybersecurity is still relatively new. So thank you very much for the introduction and good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure and privilege to have been given this opportunity to conduct this session on the topic of IoT security as part of the IDCSS 2022. And I would really like to thank the teams at IDCSS, Cybersecurity COE Telangana, and DSCI for this opportunity. While Adam gave a quick introduction, I'm currently accountable as Vice President for Strategy Business Development Asia at Device Authority UK. Apart from my professional accountability, I also volunteer across various industry and government forums. And hence you will see some slides on the standards and regulations. And I also have the privilege of representing India at ISO IC SC27WG4, which recently released the first global horizontal IoT cybersecurity standard. So our focus today will be really on IoT security, which is kind of a subset of cybersecurity that focuses on protecting, monitoring, and remediating threats related to the network of connected devices that gather, store, and share data via the internet. So if you kind of let's start with looking at where the IoT market is headed. And this is the slide, the latest slide from IoT Analytics. So over the past few years, the IoT market has been experiencing explosive growth, right? So the IoT brings together physical environment and a wide range of objects, such as they can interact with one another seamlessly through the range of objects that through the use of ICT or information and communication systems. And it really encompasses many supporting technologies such as sensing, control, networking technology, information technology, software. And together, all of these technologies really enable sensors, actuators, middleware, data and communication networks and applications, right? And this interconnects together to form an IoT ecosystem, right? So the significance of the economic impact of IoT is pretty much well documented. You can look up anywhere, and increasingly being felt. And you see an increasing adoption of IoT now amongst consumers, enterprises and government. So if you really look at the stats here, and what that really interprets to is we have about 25, 26 million, I'm sorry, billion connected devices, which is what Gartner also forecasted, out of which about 16.4 billion are pure play IoT devices. And when I say pure IoT, I'm excluding phones, tablet, PC, laptops, fixed line phone, which are again connected, but not truly pure play IoT devices. So what are IoT devices? Devices like health bands, smart bulbs, smart speakers, video surveillance cameras, connected air purifiers, smart thermostats, smart locks, IoT gateway, connected cars now, so on and so forth. So that's already two connected devices on an average per human being on the planet by end of this year. And this number will actually further double to about 2025. Right. So despite this projected growth, a recent survey of both the service providers and enterprise users has majority of the businesses having quoted a serious concern about the threat of breach to their infrastructure. If you look up the latest Microsoft Signals report, which is probably one of the best reports on IoT, indicates that 91% of decision makers across top organizations mention that IoT security is a concern and will come up as a major barrier when it comes to IoT adoption. So while we all agree that IoT will usher in a raft of new innovative network connected devices with a lot of useful application, each one of these devices is a potential entry point for malicious attacks, particularly when the standards and regulations just coming around the corner, right? So as people and devices become more connected, issues relating to safeguarding the data, the device, and management of numerous cybersecurity threats becomes increasingly important. So, and if you just look through some of the incidents, right, in the past, attacks are becoming more sophisticated, more difficult to protect against, and costlier than ever. So security precautions for IoT devices are critical for consumers and businesses alike. But before that, what we'll do is we'll deep dive and look at how IT that we all know of is different from IoT or OT. So how is IT different from IoT and OT, right? So in IT, you got laptops, you got computers, email servers, and whatever it may be that, they are typically seen as a low assurance type of devices. And when I say low assurance, what I mean to say is that if the email server goes down for 20 minutes, does it really matter? Well, some of you may argue, maybe not. Typically managed through detect and respond type of approach. So, there'll be a network administrator who might put this device on a network. He will give you the device, give you a username, password, or you generate it, and you can log in and then manage right, so that they manage to understand specific networking tools. So what this person is accessing, what is he allowed to access, what he or she can access on the network. There's typically a manual approach to that type of product, to getting it onboarded and managing the security posture around it. Now, where we are really moving towards uh, isn't well obvious. It's kind of a resilience by design and a high assurance model, because what we are talking about here on the right hand side is about equipments like medical equipments, robots, connected cars, and all those use cases which could result in an injury or a fatality. And so they require a different sort of security model. Also consider the fact that unlike a IT system, the IoT devices don't really have the requisite horsepower or memory to have a conventional antivirus or an anti-malware installed, like what is possible on IT devices today, right? So you have to look at this in a protect and a prevent model. So where you build in security right from the outset to address the fundamental challenges around security requirements of this type of devices, and equally the scale. Talk about millions of devices. You can't manage these things manually. We already spoke about on an average of two connected or two IoT devices actually per human being on this planet by the end of this year, and it's going to grow, exponentially. So you can't manage these things manually, and what is really required is automation. Now let me first set the context, because context is everything, especially for the folks who plan to look at IoT cybersecurity as a career option. We are in the midst of a cyber warfare, right? And it becomes more apparent with the ongoing conflicts. You've seen Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, but really if you go look and read about what's happening on the cyber turf, probably more number of attacks happening. And the cyberspace really is the new frontier of war between countries, and has replaced conventional warfare as we know it. But what is really interesting here is in most of the cases, the computers are not the final target. It is the system that these computers control, right? So if you look at this report, which is the global risk report from World Economic Forum, and this was 2021, there was a survey conducted with world leaders attending the World Economic Forum in Davos, and the response clearly indicate that cybersecurity failure is a clear and present danger and ranks pretty high on that list, right? Cyber attacks also figure consistently in the WEF Global Risk Report since 2018. So it's been consistently there and has been ranking amongst the top 5, both in terms of likelihood and impact to humanity. So why is this significant with respect to the topic that we are on to today, which is IoT and IoT security, right? Now, if you go deep into this report, you'll find the World Economic Forum actually quotes 30% of these attacks are estimated to target IoT applications, and 25% of the enterprise attacks are actually routed through IoT, which are part of that network. So this should not really come as a surprise, given that IoT provides for the path of least resistance for adversaries and hackers to get into enterprises, homes, and public spaces, right? So IoT is very different, like I explained, from IT and also from traditional networks, because which kind of makes it more vulnerable to attacks and harder to defend, right? So the top two complications that you'll see, and I'll talk about it in a while, is the sheer number of interconnected IoT device network offers hackers millions of points of attack. So the attack surface is pretty big, right? So in addition, now we have edge devices which could sit anywhere. So edge devices are no more restricted to a secured environment where it's protected by a firewall. An edge device could be anywhere. It could be on the road, it could be inside a shopping mall, it could be inside a hospital. And they really aggregate IoT data and are actually vulnerable to various security threats, right? Second, the sheer complexity. So billions of these network sensors and actuators are controlled by numerous sophisticated software programs, right? So the complication here is how do you secure it, identify the root cause of an attack, and this is really getting difficult, right? So with the line of codes actually going up. So uh, for security enthusiasts looking for a career option in IoT cybersecurity, Microsoft security report that came out recently, there is a record-setting 3 million people shortage of cybersecurity professionals globally, and this massive talent shortage is causing an overextension of security teams, leaving organizations coverage without any security coverage or expertise for new IoT deployments. And that is where the opportunity is for the folks here. Welcome to not so distant future. Now, this is one of my favorite slides. The recent ransomware attacks have demonstrated how vulnerable our infrastructure is and how it can impact us. If you've heard some scenarios where there were cyber attacks on Colonial Pipeline and JPS Foods in the US, which actually created literally gasoline shortage and threatened meat supplies in the US. In fact, recently there was a ransomware attack on a hospital in Düsseldorf, Germany, where it actually led to death of a patient, right? So while most ransomware attacks currently infiltrate an organization via email, kind of a phishing attack, a new delivery system for both mass and targeted attacks is actually on the horizon, with the mainstream adoption of IoT, which again, like I said, is a path for adversaries, a preferred path because of the kind of constraint resources it has and easy to exploit, and an explosive growth of ransomware as a service, right? So this involves ransomware kits sold on dark web now, making cybercrime accessible to just about anyone, regardless of their technical skills. So this graphics here may be hilarious, but this could actually be a reality soon. And also consider the serious or even life-threatening impact of ransomware on smart devices with critical application. A cyber criminal could potentially have the means to turn off lighting or heating system, and this actually happened in Milwaukee last year, or kind of lock users out of their home or businesses. Moreover, they can even affect the safety of the drivers by tracking and hacking their IoT enabled vehicles, turn off and we've seen the entire power grids being attacked and switched off, right? So and of course more critical, so smart medical device such as pacemaker could be attacked. So let's start with a kind of primer on IoT threats. So we can classify generally 5 types of security attacks on IoT systems or deployments. So the first one is physical attack. Now these kind of attacks tamper with the hardware components and are relatively harder to perform because they kind of require expensive tools and material. And some examples are like there's a chip and you want to kind of depackage it, layout reconstruction, micro probing, particle beam kind of techniques, which are pretty complicated, so require very expensive tools and material. Then you have the side channel attacks. Now these attacks are based on side channel information that can be retrieved from a device which has encryption capabilities. So the encryption device actually produces some kind of timing information that is measurable, right? So it could be some kind of power consumption statistics, it could be some kind of radiation. So some examples are differential power analysis, electromagnetic analysis, so on and so forth. And then you have the third type of attack, which is called the crypt analysis attack. Now these attacks are kind of focused on the ciphertext. So they basically try to break the encryption, that is find the encryption key, and they do that to obtain the plain text. Man in the middle attack is one of the popular, kind of crypt analysis attack that we have. And then you have a whole lot of software and software attacks. So software attacks are actually a major source of security vulnerability in any system. So software attacks exploit implementation vulnerabilities in the system, and this through their own communication interface. So this kind of attack includes exploiting buffer overflows, using Trojan horse programs, worms, viruses to deliberately inject malicious code into the system, and jamming, right? And then you have the network attacks. So wireless communication systems are now vulnerable to network security attacks due to the broadcast nature of the transmission medium, right? So basically attacks are classified as active and passive. So some of the passive ones are, when you monitor and eavesdrop or some kind of traffic analysis. And then there are active attacks as well, which could be DDoS, which is one of the popular modes, kind of attacks that happen on IoT. Now, the challenge, talking about IoT threats and impact, the challenge is that most of the IoT devices really have a weak or no security control, right? Although the situation is improving, majority of them or the ones that are already installed, that has been a challenge and really represents the fastest growing attack landscape for organizations all over the world, with attacks up 77% just from Jan to June 2020 period, right? So most common attacks on IoT deployment include device enslavement as botnets to mine cryptocurrency, cryptojacking as we call it, conduct espionage or spy on users, data leakage or modification of data, and also orchestrate DDoS or distributed denial of services attack. So for those of you who would like to go a little deeper into the threats, I just pulled out a IoT threat report from Palo Alto's Unit 42 that has just been updated or a couple of months ago for mid-year. And as you can see, the split really is into 3 broad areas. So 41% are exploits, including things like network scan, RCEs, command injection, buffer overflow, SQL injection, 0 days, so on and so forth. 33% is related to things like botnet, yeah, and they're still knocking around the back door, Trojan, ransomware, and worms. And then there's user practice space, so things like default password, things we shouldn't have on products today. phishing, cryptojacking thrown in as well. But as you see, vulnerabilities and threat which IoT device sort of carry, attackers see that as an effective way, as an easy target, and it's mainly used as a stepping stone to really get into the system and then perform a lateral movement inside the network. So that's the objective, right? So get into the network through a constrained IoT devices, which is full of vulnerabilities, and then make a lateral movement inside the network. So get onto an IoT device, use exploit in some way, perhaps through critical vulnerability found on the software or the hardware, and then get onto the device and then kind of move it through the network. And we've seen that many times actually, which is why it's really important that we talk about putting the right security controls in place to mitigate that. So a good repository or a good reference to start with, OWASP. So OWASP has done a great job, published the top 10 IoT vulnerabilities in view of the rising cases of cyber attacks for manufacturers. And this is really to build learnings into the device. So adopting security measures kind of equips the manufacturers and the buyers to better address threats. So using this, manufacturers are really expected to kind of integrate these principles, end-to-end security, and enable end-to-end security with continuous testing, of course, and throughout all product development stages or cycles, right? So going to the OS top 10 for IoT starts with really a default or a weak guessed or a hard-coded password or default credentials. Second is, insecure network services. So things like having services running on your device, which shouldn't be running on the device. Now an entry point for those rogue attackers. And then you have the insecure ecosystem interface, which is not having an authenticated backend. So APIs, for example, but not securing those APIs in your backend, another entry point. Lack of secure update mechanism. We see actually a number of vendors that have got update mechanism in place, good, but they're not secure. So how do you prevent somebody actually instigating a firmware attack on your update on the device, right? If you can't attest the software is trustworthy on the device, and how can you make sure that it's running the right software through that update? So very critical. Number 5, use of insecure update components. So in fact, when we talk about some of the upcoming regulations, specifically the EU or the European Union Resilience Act, which I'll go through in a bit, actually calling out the fact that you shouldn't produce and go to the market with outdated or insecure vulnerabilities found on the products. So that's a big shift, right, in terms of what is being called out for, and what is expected out of the manufacturers. Insufficient privacy protection is not having the right controls around the data clearly, and things like medical is really important in that space. And how do you protect that PI, as we call it, protected health information data coming out of the device, and it's really sensitive patient data. The next we have is insecure data transfer and storage. So how you get it off the device securely and then store it securely on the backend system, and only allow certain applications to access the data or users to access the data. And then you have the insecure default setting. Yeah, that's a sort of hygiene thing. And I think the idea is to make sure that you have the right default configuration settings and all these in the first place, right? And the next one is lack of device management, and this really kind of refers to the inability to effectively secure all the devices on the network. So it exposes the system to numerous threats. Lack of physical hardening. So an example in physical hardening space is things that don't expose the debug headers or ports on your board, right? So don't root them out. So somebody could actually physically get on to the device by hooking up to the debug port and understand what's actually or what software is on there, and probably do some modifications or exploit it. So what can manufacturers do to combat the IoT vulnerabilities? Well, we don't have all the controls here, but looking at the best practices and what can be done, uh, minimum things that will have maximum impact, right? So now we look at some of the good principles manufacturers should do and kind of help mitigate these type of threats. So starting with having a unique set of credentials for each device. Now you don't use the same across thousands of devices, and that holds good also for customers or clients or manufacturers who actually use certificates. And we've seen many scenarios where customers get certificate-based authentication, which is great. But have you got default or have you got unique certificates on each device? Well, no. Actually, it is one certificate which is being used across multiple devices, maybe tens of thousands of devices. And that's not a good security practice. As we all know, that the adversary could get into one of those devices, fish out the credential and use it to connect to your backend infrastructure, right? Uh, Disallow connections with high risk network. Don't use public Wi-Fi. Always use segmentation techniques. Authenticate, authorize the endpoints. Now you got to be able to do that these days because all these IoT applications that you see out there connect to IoT platforms like Azure, AWS, PTC, Google Cloud, and all the IoT applications typically rely on X509 certificates, which is an industry standard, to be able to authenticate the device to the application. And you have to do that, otherwise you can't trust the device. And if you can't trust the device, you can't trust the data coming out of them. The next one is verify source and integrity of updates with digital signature. So you need to be able to do that end to end and make sure that the right software on the device and that you can trust it with using digital cryptography to support that. Digital signature is very critical. Replace legacy technology. So don't use old libraries is what it means, because you are sticking code in there with a whole bunch of vulnerabilities that could be out there, known vulnerabilities. So you're already making a bad starting point. Storing necessary information, ensure end-to-end security, encryption of data, and this both in transit, at rest and in processing. So we all know encryption is easy, right? But the actual difficult part is the key management around that, right? So how do I get the keys in the right place? How can I manage the keys when you think the end-to-end flow in IoT, right? Say encrypting some data from the edge into the application. So how do you share the keys between the two? So that's very critical, and especially if you're using symmetric key algorithms. Secure the decommissioning and monitoring of asset, right? Actually, you look at end of life of your IoT device. So what do you do about it, right? So you absolutely need to make sure you revoke the credentials that are there on the device so that they cannot be used anymore to connect to the IoT application. You might also want to delete any data of the device. So if somebody happens to get hold of those IoT devices that have been decommissioned, there's nothing on there for them to do something with the data, right? And of course, compel user to change password after device installation, validate firmware through secure boot, and all of this really, these 10 really good principles that you should really take away and from, and really encourage you to look at this stuff, because it is really quite useful when you're building the IoT devices in the ecosystem. So if you plan to go deep into IoT security, the IoT security standard, especially the new ones, are your best references, right? So given the adoption of IoT and the sensitivity of the systems, the data, there's a clear need for IoT security related regulation standards, and that actually would spur IoT adoption, right? So the IoT security standardization is really today an imperative. Many organizations believe that development of industry standard will be the single most important step to driving IoT adoption. So, and as you'll see, IoT industry is very fragmented, right? So with a lot of standard and quasi-standard industry bodies trying to address similar issues. So it's very critical that the industry is aligned around the same approach, and standard is required, which kind of requires a broad alignment and participation from the industry players, right? Academia and government. So let's look at the consumer IoT security. So I'm just going to touch upon some of these standards, especially the relevant ones. So talking about consumer, right? And like you saw the stats about 2 devices per human being on the planet, right? Majority, in fact, 60% of them, of that 16 billion that you saw, is actually consumer. So there exist, 26 billion connected devices on the planet, and out of that 16 billion IoT devices. And the percentage share that I mentioned, 60%, actually is expected to remain the same for the next decade. right? So consumer IoT will be a major share of the IoT device that will be deployed over the next decade. So the first global standard for consumer IoT security actually came from ETSI. It's called EN 303645, which is basically a cybersecurity for consumer IoT standard, first of its kind, that will really impact the IoT producers community, right? So we are talking of designers, developers, manufacturers, and other vendors. So it kind of specifies high level provision, 13 to be precise, and 5 for data privacy for the security and privacy of internet connected consumer devices and their associated services as well. So even with those 13 plus 5 provisions that we have, which is what called the baseline, the provision really covers every major attack at scale in consumer IoT. So the objective is really to have a comprehensive protection against significant threats. Industrial IoT, and as you're aware, Industry 4.0 has been here for some time, and there's a shift in industrial domain from just talking about safety to now safety plus security when it comes to industrial automation and control system. Also consider the fact that the level of security which you find in consumer IoT just won't cut it for the industrial IoT, right? Uh, there's another issue that the industry is facing today is that a lot of top manufacturers actually use proprietary protocols and processes. So they have introduced their own vision and internal policies, right, for building in protection into embedded system and making automation more difficult to understand. So this is where the 62443 comes in, which was released by SAIC, now ISO adopting it, and it kind of provides for a flexible framework for mitigating the security vulnerabilities of industrial automation and control system, both current and future, right? So they're kind of designed to prevent danger to public employees, loss of public confidence, violation of regulatory requirements, IP thefts, national security attacks, because now these standards are also being kind of adopted for critical infrastructure, and they have now become the basis of many industry specific standards. So one of the features of the 62443 is really it defines the role of a product supplier, a SI or a system integrator, and asset owner. So each of these ecosystem partners or actors, if I may, have a unique role to play in the design, development, marketing, operations, and maintenance of industrial cybersecurity solutions. Automotive, and you've seen a slew of connected cars and EVs out there on the road. So cybersecurity has risen in importance as the automotive industry really undergoes a transformation driven by new personal mobility concepts such as now semi or autonomous driving, vehicle electrification, and car connectivity. And I just saw, a Juniper research report where about 800 million consumer vehicles will be connected via telematics or in-vehicle apps by next year, by end of next year. And another McKinsey report actually talks about the cars have about 150 electronic control units and about 100 million lines of code already. And because of the kind of sophistication that we are bringing into the automotive, we will have about 300 million lines of source code by end of 2030. Now, if you really compare that with space shuttle, the space shuttle have about 500,000 lines of code, even Boeing 777, right? So it's huge. So this amount of code also creates an extensive opportunity for cyber attacks, right? And not only for the car itself, but also all the components of its ecosystem when we especially talk of V2I, V2X. So one of the standards and regulation that I'm going to talk about is starting with WP29. So the World Forum for Harmonization of Vehicle Regulation under UN EC or Economic Commission for Europe actually released new regulations on cybersecurity and over-the-air software update to treat risk associated with cyber threats to vehicles and protect them against cyber attacks. So this will impact automotive regulations in 60 countries already. In Asia, it's impacted Japan and South Korea because they are one of the major suppliers. Another interesting standard and a must read for security enthusiasts is the ISO SAE 21434, which is the road vehicle cybersecurity engineering. So the goal goal is really to kind of build upon functional safety standard, which exists for quite a few years now, which is ISO 26262, and really provide a framework which is similar to it for the entire life cycle, right from the design, development, production, maintenance to after sales, till decommissioning. So the major components of this new standard include cybersecurity within the concept of uh, product development, post development, like I mentioned. So interesting development there. And last but not the least, the Internet of Medical Things. So medical devices are increasingly connected to internet now, and especially after aftermath of COVID. And now you have hospital networks, medical device that provides a slew of feature that kind of improve the healthcare, increase the ability of the healthcare professionals to treat patients remotely. But what they also do is create opportunities for threat actors to execute cybersecurity attacks, which are designed to steal highly personal information or disrupt the treatment efforts, right? So some of the key references that you look up, and there are two that came up this year, was IMDRF, which is the International Medical Device Regulator Forum, and US FDA, which is the United States Food and Drug Authority. So they have come up with something called a pre-market, post-market submissions, and recommendations for management of cybersecurity in medical devices. And what it actually does is provide general principles and best practices to facilitate, international regulatory convergence on medical device cybersecurity by having the device manufacturer enhance product resilience, cybersecurity resilience, and remediate vulnerabilities, and really mitigate risk through what they call the total product lifecycle, right? TPLC. Now you saw a slew of standards across verticals, right? But is that creating a lot of confusion for OEMs? Well, the multiplicity of expert recommendations, right? The multiple recommendations that you saw does create questions about where to start and how to consider such a wealth of overlapping recommendations and which ones to follow, and especially for OEMs who are making a big investment in security. So there is an absolute need for a common baseline of security capabilities for all IoT devices, irrespective of what vertical or what use case they cater to. So the baseline will really help lift all the IoT device cybersecurity. The fact that most of the IoT market is comprised of low or medium complexity devices makes it more important for the baseline to be applicable to any kind of devices, right? So uh, there's a new joint publication by IAC ISO, which establishes a reference architecture for IoT using a common vocabulary, reusable design, and industry best practices. So you have, there are two 27400, which is basically the guidelines for security and privacy in IoT, and then there's 27402, which is IoT security and privacy device baseline requirement. 27400 was launched a few months back, and these horizontal standards will really provide controls that can be used across multiple industry sectors and product verticals like health, finance, services, individual consumer, and transportation. So you have a baseline, and then you can build on top based on what additional requirement are expected from the use case. So this is a good start. And talking about regulations, well, now based on the standards, good practices, there are standards now leading to regulations, which we already see a host of regulations being worked in various geographies across the globe. And I would like to touch upon a couple of them in the interest of time, and talk about how it's impacting the IoT deployment. So the first one is the US, and this is the executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. So the President Biden's executive order was signed in May 2021, and the objective was really to improve the nation's cybersecurity, directly related to trustworthiness and transparency, right? And all digital infrastructure that gets connected to the federal system. So basically, we're talking coverage for IT, OT, IoT, and industrial IoT, right? So anything and everything that runs software is in the scope: cloud service, on-premises application servers, connected devices, all systems that provide critical function. So as far as IoT is concerned, right, the intent is to have organizations apply the same level of standards of security associated with the enterprise users, right? So hence the need for machine identity, so that you have a strong identity associated with the machine, fully automating the machine identity lifecycle for IoT devices. So it essentially talks about, it includes some controls like rotating credentials based on policy, addressing the scale of issue, and driving zero trust principle to the internet edge, where most of these devices operate today or in the future, right? And further, organization will need to integrate capabilities like SBOM and software bill of material, validation and automation. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. End-to-end data encryption at device level, secure delivery of signed code to devices. So in a nutshell, executive order talks about SBOMs, supply chain security, collaboration amongst ecosystem players, and zero trust, which also holds good for IoT. The other interesting one is the European Cyber Resilience Act. So September 15th, right, this year, the European Commission actually published a proposal for a future Cyber Resilience Act, which aims at setting common cybersecurity standards for connected devices and services. The most important aspect of this new proposed CRA regulation is that it kind of expresses it kind of focuses on digital products, connected services. In other words, the world of IoT and connected objects. So the proposed regulation will cover hardware, software products through their whole life cycle, right from cradle to grave, right? And cybersecurity takes into account planning, design, development, production, delivery, maintenance phases, which I spoke about earlier. And then the proposed regulation also makes manufacturers accountable, as they will be required to document all cybersecurity risks, right? And another important thing that you'll see also later, a bit later, is the vulnerability reporting, right? So there's an obligation to report vulnerabilities, exploits, and incidents, so that a policy can be set up to handle all these kind of vulnerabilities during the whole product life cycle. And this to provide clear instructions to user and integrators, and to deliver security updates for each of those as it comes. And this for at least 5 years. So I will quickly browse through this, but to summarize on the key words from the essential security requirements for the connected devices that we can interpret from these two or more regulations that will come up, is need for an appropriate level of security right from design, development, production. Products must be delivered without any known vulnerability. There's a need for identity management, and authorization is a requirement. Ensure data integrity at all stages. And the one that I spoke about at the end, security updates. There's a lot of focus on vulnerability management now, and that's where you will see that Biden's executive order or EU Resilience Act talking about software bill of material. They talk about facilitating information sharing through vulnerabilities and providing a contact for the said reporting. Right. So security is a common denominator, and the security assures IoT devices operate as intended. So securing IoT is actually a multifaceted, faceted challenge that kind of demands a layered approach, right? Security must be addressed not only in the device, but also in the network infrastructure. You see the cloud architecture, edge providers, and other elements of IoT that kind of interact with these devices. So what are the IoT attack vectors here? You see the hardware. There's a firmware, and the firmware essentially, we're talking of UEFI file systems, bootloaders. You have embedded application and web services. You have network here, radio and wireless communication, and of course, cloud. And then, of course, you have the mobile apps, so Android OS, iOS, and then APIs. So it is imperative that the IoT security measures are actually deployed across the stack. And what I mean by that is, start with a secure microcontroller. You need a strong identity root of trust. The device should go through a secure provisioning and programming. The OEM should leverage secure boot capabilities. There has to be a secure key storage, a TPM, or a secure element where you can store your secrets. Device software, firmware configuration, securing interface, data protection at rest, in motion, at processing, privacy engineering by design, building in event logging audit capabilities, which you also see in some of the NIST recommendations. Best practices employing software secure development lifecycle, or SSDL as we call it, conducting pen tests, a penetration test, using industry standards for secure communication, protecting data in motion. And then on the other side, you see securing connection with cloud with authentication, authorization, enabling end-to-end data encryption to the cloud such that the data is not visible to network or the cloud operator. And then the secure lifecycle management, which most of the standards have started talking about, which means that the device identity and related authorization, key management system, and secure update needs to be managed throughout the lifecycle, right from chip onwards to the time the device is decommissioned. So this is further complemented with a real-time monitoring measure, for which we see a lot of vendors today offering detect, respond, and recover capabilities. So if you refer to any of the new standards and regulations, you will notice IoT security lifecycle as a critical piece, and the lifecycle really starts here at stage one. So this is, just kind of a edge to enterprise model where you can have a security lifecycle being managed in a completely automated way. So secure production involves chip provisioning of root keys, certificates at the time of manufacturing. Secure production, next step is provisioning, which is done with a lot of manual effort today, where now we have zero touch provisioning as part of secure onboarding process, which transfers the device ownership and connects to an owner controlled environment without any human interventions, right? So there's a new standard called FIDO device onboarding, which kind of makes this onboarding process, standardized, automated, secure, cost effective, and flexible. So once the device binds to the IoT platform, and it could be any platform like Azure, AWS, PTC, GPredix, and related services, the next step really is that the IoT security management involves secure device registration and provisioning. It involves PKI key rotation, secure device updates, and identity authentication. Data security keys are managed. Now, the next phase is where majority of the enterprise IoT security implementations lack today, because they need to take into account that the existing IT security controls for data should seamlessly interoperate with IoT devices. And this is really a critical piece for bringing in zero trust, right? So, and this is the missing piece today. So for a solution to be deemed end-to-end, it really needs to have a seamless integration with the enterprise identity access management, privileged access management, data security platform, enterprise infrastructure like hardware security modules, or external vendors like certification or third-party certification authority. So the identity and access management of that IoT device should interoperate with the enterprise traditional IAM or identity access management to authorize and share data between the IoT devices and the enterprise systems and the user. The IoT lifecycle device, the IoT security lifecycle is actually incomplete without the decommissioning and recommissioning. So decommissioning would mean that the device is disconnected from the platform, services, goes through a factory reset, or may involve physical removal. And recommissioning is example would be ownership transfer, where the whole cycle repeats again with a new credential, right? And this is some of the work we do at Device Authority. So future-proofing standards. And if you're really interested to know more about this, I would highly recommend you read articles and features on these topics, because these are something that are coming up in a big way, and you see more of this over the next few years, being part of the standards and regulations. So privacy engineering. So people will eventually be kind of surrounded by hundreds of thousands of IoT devices. So even if communications link are encrypted, which are these days most of the times, and protected, information about people might still be collected or processed for different purposes. So user control over the collection and processing of personal information by IoT devices and services is required, and hence the need to have privacy by design principles right from the start. Trustworthiness, and you saw this as part of the Biden's executive order, and what it really means is establishing trustworthiness for an IoT system is one of the key factors really to ensure that the system can really deliver on its objectives, right? And there are several characteristics of the system like security, safety, and then add to that reliability, resilience, and privacy. And the idea is to be compliant despite whatever environmental disturbances or human errors or system faults and attacks that happen. And this must be addressed throughout the long life cycle of the system. So that's what trustworthiness is all about. And we see a slew of standards on trustworthiness coming up as well. Zero trust architecture, again, a term that you saw in Biden's executive order. And Microsoft actually has quite a bit of literature on this, on zero trust architecture for IoT, which I would highly recommend. So when the system is crucial and there is, a shift from trust but verify, a concept many security methods are built onto now. Never trust, always verify. Now this can really reduce the risk against both internal and external attacks, right? So IoT is one area where zero trust may be particularly useful. And the idea is that if there is no complete control on a device, right, it should be able to access anything. Now, there is a kind of autonomous nature that the IoT devices will have eventually. And what that will require is a strong identity, registration, renewable credentials, passwordless authentication, because when we're talking M2M, you can't have a password-based authentication system. Multi-factor authentication doesn't work. So there's a need for passwordless authentication and hardware root of trust to ensure identity can be trusted. And then, of course, access control via least privileges accesses, monitor threat and anomalies, and ensure devices are updated, which are key pillars of zero trust. Quantum, very interesting. We already see some activity on that. NIST is already shortlisting some of the QC algorithms. So, and the reason is that over the years, the cryptographic algorithms have been using principle of mathematics to develop efficient crypto systems like RSA. Now that's quickly changing because now with quantum computers which use physics, right, instead of mathematics, are now capable of cracking such keys. So with quantum computers going mainstream in the future, the current security levels will not hold good, right? And we are talking something like 5 to 8 years from now. So there's a need for a robust crypto system for IoT, and based on initial analysis, seems like the quantum mechanics used to send and receive messages is believed to be 100% unhackable and secure. And last but not the least, and probably the most, I would say, buzzword these days is the SBOM. And SBOM really is a formal record containing details and supply chain relationships of various components used in building software, right? So SBOMs allow the manufacturer of a product to make sure that these components are up to date and can quickly respond to any new vulnerability. So buyer can also use an SBOM to perform some kind of vulnerability analysis or license analysis, both of which can be used to evaluate risk in a product. So integrating SBOM in IoT security platform that I talked about a little while back really improves the cybersecurity by reducing the risk of compromised devices, data from entering critical enterprise data analytics system, right? So automated and compliant zero trust decisions now are underpinned by a transparent check on all the software libraries that exist on a particular device. So I would like to conclude here, and really my message is security is really a shared responsibility. And now with standardization regulations coming, IoT will see a broad alignment and participation. Academia, industry, government, users will need to come together, and the ecosystem really need to incorporate security by design, simplicity by design, privacy by design, and trust by design, right from development phase and throughout the life cycle till the end of life. So with that, yeah, I will hand it over to Adam Gill. So
Thank you so much for your expert insights, sir. Thank you. Apologies for the bandwidth issues on my end. One of the students sent me an email during the lecture that my screen kept blinking. I believe that is now troubleshooted. Let's move on to some questions for the rest of the hour, sir. We have a question from Venkateswara. How will it affect the current security system when quantum computing evolves? Any specific examples, sir?
Yeah, so like I said, how it will evolve is so quantum computing, or let me put it this way. So you heard about what I talked about RSA, right? So now because instead of mathematics, you will have quantum computers use physics, and we will have a very robust algorithm that we use today, which is RSA, which actually is not only being used for IoT, but also for a whole lot of other applications, including banking, will be broken, right? So the whole idea is when quantum computing kicks in, the quantum cryptography will be a key area. And what it will really enable is a point-to-point lightweight based transmission technology that uses photons, right, via fiber optic cable link. Now, the best part about this technique is when it comes to IoT or any other encryption technologies, the transmission can be audited, and and the physics of the quantum mechanical effects can be applied to determine if any eavesdropping has occurred, right? And it's supposed to be 100% unhackable and secure. By the way, I have to tell you, there are already now players who are deploying QC for defense applications. I hope I answered your question, Venkat.
Thank you, sir. I believe you did. And in fact, defense also comes up during the next question from Dr. Praveen Naidu. Good session, sir. We are working on design and development of antennas for defense and small satellite applications. So my question is related to cybersecurity for space-grade components, especially cybersecurity for satellite antennas, where it connects with ground station antennas. Can you please explain how to give security to such components? Is there any course on cybersecurity for space-grade components?
Yeah, frankly, the cybersecurity on the device is the domain of the crypto, not really nothing to do with the temperature grade of or space grade of the equipment. So the device that you're using in your design should be capable of generating crypto keys. If not, then you could probably complement it with a secure element or a TPM, which is then capable of generating the public private key, right? So what I suggest, probably this is a topic that needs some more discussions. So you have my email ID on the screen. Please feel free to reach out. But yes, we are actually right now deploying something similar, which is basically a SAT system, which talks to a ground system. And then what you essentially need to start with is a secure hardware, a secure storage for storing your secrets, and of course, the secure data transmission, which means end-to-end data encryption, decryption, and last but not the least, if there is certain data onto the cloud that needs to be sent, that entire connection has to be secured. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. I believe we ran out of time, but Mr. Rao was generous enough to open his email to questions from the audience. So I would like to encourage you to reach out to Mr. Rao there. And sir, thank you so much once again for your valuable contribution to the Cyber School. Personally, I found your lecture very, very informative and illuminating, and we really hope to see you as one of our experts during next year's Cyber School as well.
Look forward to Adam. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank all of you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, sir. Have a fantastic evening.
You too.